So, welcome to Walpole United WFC.
Good evening and welcome to All for United, the WFC Women's Football Chat Show. Tonight I've got Gareth, as always, joining me, and I've also got Rob. Gareth, how are we?
Yeah, good, thank you. Looking forward to this. It should be a good chat.
Yeah, and obviously welcome back as well, Rob. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. I mean, it's been a very quiet week for my football club, so I'm not really sure why I'm here, to be honest.
So lots of topics then tonight. Obviously, a couple of stories carried over from last week. We've got Rob to come on and chat about Chelsea women. Obviously, there's been a lot written on Chelsea in the last sort of week or so. We're going to look at sort of ways in which, it can go forward for the club. Hopefully as well, I've been reading that there's a potential couple of interested parties in terms of a takeover. So that's something on the agenda as well. We're also going to discuss WSL wages. There was an article put out last week, and there's certain clubs paying less than 20k a year. So we'll discuss that and how that will affect clubs in terms of recruiting the likes of young players and whether other careers may be viable for players that are on that wage. And also as well announced yesterday the FA Cup prize money. They finally agreed and put out a figure as well, we believe, which is £3 million. So that as well will also form part of tonight's show. So, Rob, I'll start with you then. As you alluded to before, potentially a quiet week for Chelsea. I suppose we better start from the start, really. Obviously, there was the sanctions placed on the club as a whole by the government. Mm-hmm. There's been lots of talk since that over everything, what it's going to mean for the club. But in terms of the overall mood from supporters, what do you think it's been in terms of, like I say, sort of, could this affect the season? Because people are saying to me, oh, well, they've only allowing season tickets, it's going to affect on the pitch. But, if anybody watched the performance against West Ham, I don't think it affected anybody personally. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I would say that, Chelsea women certainly have the highest proportion of season ticket holders in the league. I think there's about 1,500 sort of season ticket holders. And I guarantee you, come hell or high water, they will be sort of turning up. Again, I was there the other day on sort of For Sunday's game, and I say atmosphere-wise, it was one of the best atmospheres we've had all season. Again, you could tell that it reminded people, I think, that the club, what it meant to them, but also the fact that, Chelsea is not just this sort of behemoth that it's been made out to be in the last couple of days, and this pool of sort of Russian invasion in the English game. It is a lot more than that. And I went and chatted to the staff who are the people that are most likely to be affected, the people that work at the grounds, the people that work at, the burger kiosk, the people that do the tickets. And what sort of struck me was an overwhelming sense on Sunday of pointing out that, kind of what will be, but ultimately there was a lot of them that, I know are long-term Chelsea fans, they're sort of supporters who work for the club, some of them are sort of semi-retired, and they said, we're not doing this for the salary. We're doing it because we enjoy Chelsea women. And again, particularly the head sort of steward on the women's side. She used to be the former sort of head of stewarding on the men's side, head of security. I know financially she isn't in it for, financial gains. If she wanted to, she could enjoy a very, very comfortable retirement because of the way she's been paid throughout her career. But she does it more for the love of it and the fact that she enjoys, she has a great relationship with the supporters group and a good relationship with, the regulars there. So I think it's sort of important to stress on that. I think more as a general point of view, I don't think Chelsea fans disagree with sanctions being placed on Roman Abramovich or on the fact that there's a need to do something for the sort of invasion and the war in Ukraine. As a period point, I've not seen any fan, challenge that or say Roman shouldn't be sanctioned or say, that we shouldn't be sanctioning it or sort of, not condoning the war. What I will say is that increasingly over the last couple of days, with more and more media coming out, the focus seems to shift less away from how we can actually help Ukraine and more about just having a pop at Chelsea Football Club for all sorts of things. I don't know if either of you saw Monday Night Football yesterday, but Jamie Carragher's comments about Chelsea's academy, for instance, were at best misguided and at worst libelous, because I know, I've spoken to sort of Nigel James before and Tony Mount, the fathers of Mason Mount and Reece James. They were not bribed to go and go to the club. They were not bribed to go work as a scout. They weren't given, these sort of scouting positions that are invented. And Carragher, sort of, again, glass houses and throwing stones springs to mind, because I Googled it and immediately the first thing that came up when I searched for Liverpool academies was that they were banned in 2017 for a year for making payments to them. I'm not going to say that every club is whiter than white. I'm not saying Chelsea don't do it. I know every club does it. There's a reason why, Jadon Sancho went from Watford to Manchester City. It wasn't due to, footballing reasons. There's a reason why Chelsea signed Andreas Christensen from Bromby at 15. It isn't due to that. But what annoys me is that suddenly we're getting these moral lectures from journalists. And again, Martin Samuel in his article put it brilliantly and said, these pompous lectures from the press box, where I guarantee you these journalists will be the same people going out to Qatar later this year and having all expense paid trips to Qatar to cover the World Cup. And it's quite galling that suddenly it feels like, to me, the focus is moving away from actually pressuring the government to do something about the refugee situation and pressuring the government to, sort out the Russian links within, say, the Conservative Party, to just being, let's sanction Chelsea Football Club and it'll all sort itself out. Because Chelsea Football Club is a lot more than, the last 20 years, whatever fans want to make it or not. It was founded in 1905 in a pub in Kensington in the Butcher's Hook by a group of like-minded people that wanted a local football club. And there is history that predates it. There will be a history after Roman Abramovich. There is a history before that. And no one is going to ever take that away from Chelsea.
Yeah. Gareth, I want to bring you in because it's sort of something that obviously Rob's been talking about there. And I think obviously everybody acknowledges what's going on. And everybody, like you said, Rob, nobody's saying that the sanctions shouldn't be there. And we all understand it. But I think one sort of thing for me that people maybe don't think about is the fans. Because I think for me, and I'll let you come in again, Rob, after Gareth, but I think one thing that people haven't thought about is the fans. Obviously, you mentioned there, about 1,500 plus season ticket sales, and obviously they're, still turning up to support the team, and rightly so. But I think it's difficult because as a fan, you're not gonna know how to handle it, are you? Like you said, there's been things thrown there from sort of 10, 15, 20 years ago. And it's like, there's got to be a sense of perspective, for me. But what do you think, Gareth, in terms of the whole situation?
I think it's necessary. I think it's needed. I think the freezing of all of Abramovich's assets, and not just his, like all of the oligarchs, is what needed to happen. It needed to happen sooner than it did. But like it seems really, really strict. But the thing is, if you don't freeze the business accounts, then that's assets that Roman hasn't had frozen, and everything that he has to be really. Otherwise, there'll be some kind of loophole that he can target and funnel money through that way. So, yeah, it's tough. It's tough on the fans, but I think the bigger picture at the moment is more important than the fans. It's likely to kind of be a relatively temporary thing. Obviously, if it was United, would be really, really disappointed. But I think that there is a section of Chelsea fans that probably, it is almost certainly a vocal minority that haven't particularly painted the club in a particularly positive light since it's happened. Obviously, they're going to be the people that get the column inches and get the attention on Twitter. But I do feel sorry for a lot of the match-going fans. I feel sorry primarily for those that aren't season ticket holders because they now can't get tickets to games. I feel sorry for those that go home and away because away tickets can't make those sales either. It's tricky, but I think we're at a point where what is happening is necessary. I'm glad that they made the adjustments so that that Chelsea were able to kind of progress with a sale, whereas initially that was in there they couldn't even sell the club. So I think as long as as long as nothing from that goes into Roman's pockets, then I think it's a positive thing, and hopefully then the effort and attention is going to be on kind of getting that sale. But I think it's kind of contributes to a wider sports washing issue, which is we've seen time and time again clubs coming out showing solidarity with Ukraine, which is great, but it kind of really strikes me as hollow when you've got City coming out and making these enormous gestures, statements. They're giving Zinchenko the armband for games. You've got Newcastle coming out and doing similar, and they're backed by equally horrendous regimes. And I think it's an issue in not just football but in sport in general, where on the pitch they come out and they make these gestures of standing in solidarity with people, but actually behind the scenes, the people that are directly funding the club are involved in equally as horrendous things. Newcastle, in Saudi Arabia, 81 people publicly executed recently. Saudi Arabia involved in horrendous things in Yemen, and I think there's an issue where actually that's kind of overlooked, because Newcastle are going out and they're wearing yellow and blue armbands, and hey, isn't that great? I think obviously it's important to make these kind of demonstrations of support, but it is a tricky one, and I think there's a much bigger issue in sport than just Chelsea, Newcastle, City, and I don't see going away anytime soon. And I do just wonder why. Obviously, we know why Chelsea, why Roman, but I think there's bigger issues, and I think it's going to be difficult for the UEFA, FIFA. I don't see them acting at all. But yeah, it's tricky. The kind of regular Chelsea fans that go to games, that support the team, that don't do stupid things like chanting Roman Abramovich's name during a show of solidarity. They're the ones that I really feel sorry for. But underneath all, it's unfortunately necessary. I just hope the club gets sold relatively quickly, and there are kind of reserves there that can keep the club afloat. The government have a responsibility, I think, to keep the club going as long as there is the option of pursuing a sale. What we don't want to see is Chelsea going into administration or anything like that, because that would be really, really disappointing.
Yeah. Go on, Rob.
I mean, I think there's a few points I sort of will address in that. Firstly, I do agree on the wider sort of sports washing point. I think there's been so much sort of hypocritical behaviour from various parties in the last couple of weeks, coming out to have a sort of pop at Chelsea for various sort of reasons. And in terms of the finances side of things, again, it was completely okay when Liverpool were using the Littlewoods pool money in the 70s and 80s I would be on a smaller scale, but they were buying the best players up and up. Obviously, Manchester United in the past have cherry-picked top talent, and it seems to be that there was an awful lot of acceptance that this was okay before Chelsea came and did it. And the fact of the matter is, even if it hadn't been Chelsea, it would have been another club, because this was always going to happen. My second point, I suppose, and this is the one I'm a little confused by, is the government have frozen the assets but not seized them. If they wanted to really, make an impact, I don't understand why they didn't just go ahead and seize it, because from what I understand, legally, there's nothing stopping them doing it. Legally, there's absolutely nothing stopping them being able to do it, and there's also legally nothing stopping them seizing it and then pursuing a sale. I am a little concerned with the sale, the fact that the government now seems to be regulating exactly where the funds are going, because with this government, there's, morality and integrity, I think it's fair to say, have not been the cornerstones of the administration, and I worry that it will just end up, pocketed somewhere, because in reality it should be going either to sort of to Ukraine, or alternatively to a more sort of general relief fund or whatever, or some form of charitable activity, rather than just becoming sort of pocket change for MPs to use for whatever. I suppose my final point on all of it is that I think the sanctions, in a way, are slightly misguided, in that Vladimir Putin isn't going to care, and Roman Abramovich isn't going to care that fans can't go and buy a programme or get a pint at a game, or get visit the mega store or go to Frankie's bar. But the staff that are working there, from what I understand, have been placed on a sort of de facto furlough with no guarantee of what happens to their jobs. And having already come out of a pandemic where, let's face it, there was an awful lot of uncertainty about jobs. Jobs were lost in a lot of places. I think, ironically, Chelsea were one of the few Premier League clubs not to use the furlough system and to guarantee their staff all the way through. That extra uncertainty isn't really helpful, both from a fiscal point of view and a mental health point of view. And I don't think they are the ones. again, I'd sort of, I've been amongst them, people calling for the government that if there is a solution that can be set up for some account to be set up where the money can go into an account that's frozen or it goes to a charitable fund or whatever, this should have been done at haste in order to ensure that supporters who the government claim they don't want to inconvenience and don't want to damage are being protected, and therefore things like merchandise sales aren't then directly benefiting Roman Abramovich, but they can still continue, and then that secures more jobs. And my big concern out of all of this is that those jobs are just going to be seen as collateral damage in between the period of whatever it takes for the sale.
Yeah, absolutely. What I will say is, obviously, James has put on a comment, and we're going to get into ownership and going forward shortly. But if anybody watching has got any comments that they want to add or they would like us to discuss or go through them, we'll happily do that. I think for me, again, obviously, I agree with you, Gareth. You don't want to see any club go under, and obviously we've talked about that. But I do worry that the longer this drags on in terms of the ownership uncertainty and the speed in which, they can get somebody to take this club forward. But not only that, can they get the right person? Like I say, we'll go a little bit deeper into ownership very shortly. But I think for me, you've got to get that right. And that process and those checks, again, are going to take time. And you're thinking it's mid-March now. And like you said, Rob, there's so much uncertainty, mainly for staff. Like, I think it's bad for players, but I think obviously the players at Chelsea, the majority will be on a decent wage. And I know that's not the point because we're still talking people's jobs. But I don't know about you. I'll let you come in on this, Gareth. Do you worry that it could maybe start to creep in and affect players and affect performances? Or do you think that Emma Hayes will pretty much, being the great manager she is, sort of keep the off-the-field stuff sort of as far away from players as possible? I mean, it's obviously difficult because players can, click on anything and read it. But do you think that's going to potentially, longer it goes on, affects performances? Or do you think they'll be absolutely fine?
No. I mean, obviously, Tuchel and Hayes are going to be asked these questions. It's inevitable. Just like Eddie Howe has been asked questions about Saudi Arabia. There's not really a lot they can say about it. I think it's the manager's job to try and deflect it and keep it away from the players. I think the players are they're the top players in the world, and they will be able to. They've played at places where there's uncertainty before, and I think what they'll be able to do is actually just kind of focus on what they need to do and just work hard on the training pitch and then go to games. I think the difficulty in getting to games is tricky, but that's kind of primarily an away European issue. So, kind of going to and from games isn't going to be hugely difficult. I know that the men had the problem of not being able to fly to Middlesbrough. Now my question is, one, don't fly to Middlesbrough. And two, the women aren't flying to games anyway unless it's away in Europe. So, that's not necessarily going to be a problem there. I think, what was it, £20,000 they're limited to travel on away days. So if getting a coach to and from Manchester is costing you 20,000, I want to know what coaches you're using. But no, I think generally they'll be able to, the kind of day-to-day operations of training and playing should be relatively normal for the players. It may be slightly different for Hayes, and obviously with Petr Cech kind of doing the day-to-day stuff as well. It's going to be tricky. Like TJ mentioned there, that's where it's going to be difficulties, not being able to sign players or offer new contracts.
From what I just on the point of that, from what I understand, once a preferred bidder has been named by the club and they'll by the group managing the sale, the government have given an agreement that part of the legislation can be amended, by my understanding, as of this evening, which kind of makes sense because, again, contract negotiations are going to take some amount of time anyway. I will say on the CFCW side, from what I know about the players out of contract, I know one of them is expected to go anyway, and that was, predates all of this regardless. And, the rest of them have basically said, we want to stay and we will wait until, until sort of the assurance, because I understand from a Chelsea point of view, they feel this can be resolved in a relatively quick period. Again, as you sort of hinted at earlier, the government have an element of responsibility with this, because if Chelsea do go into administration, then get bought, and then there's a potential for all sorts of legal challenges, because Chelsea FC very easily in the courts could say there's no legal reason. There is a moral reason, but there is no legal reason why they went into administration, because the funding did not legally underground shouldn't have been stopped. And it comes down to, moral issues. Now, whether that's right or not is another sort of, a debate for something else entirely, I think, for a philosophical podcast. But I think it's very important to note, and I've been very, very grateful in the last years for Chelsea having Emma Hayes and Thomas Tuchel as the relevant spokespeople. Again, I don't think they need to be. Yeah, GC and Mielda are the two sort of bigger names out of contract, although I suspect that both of them will have had conversations with Emma Hayes about this, and it is a belief that, everything will be resolved before the end of the season at the latest. But going back to the earlier point, I think Emma Hayes and Tuchel shouldn't have been expected to be the official spokespeople here. I'm very annoyed and frustrated that someone from the boardroom, most prominently Bruce Buck, who is the chairman, has not come out and spoken and has not actually, engaged with the fans. There appears to be complete silence from the top level. I had to check the other day on TV. Hayes and Tuchel, I think, have handled it with the dignity and maturity that you would expect from two excellent managers and, above all, two very good people. And I think that's, again, as I said, someone else, the biggest assets Chelsea Football Club currently have are the managers. In the fact that I think there is very few players in the world that wouldn't want to play for either Hayes or Tuchel. And also, I will say at the academy level with Neil Bath as well, with the way Neil Bath has set up the vision. And I think that is the point and cornerstone. And if any new owners come in and they dare to try and make changes to them, they will face, immediate unrest. I would hope no new owner, even if they have, minimal knowledge of English football, comes in and looks at Emma Hayes and looks at Thomas Tuchel and thinks we need to upgrade on the managers. Because if they do, then they clearly aren't fit for purpose anyway.
Yeah. Gareth, is there anything you want to add before I move on to sort of ownership and going forward?
No, I just think, it's a tricky situation, and the fact that they can sort out those contract issues once a deal is agreed in principle is good, because there's top players there, and if for whatever reason some of them do leave, I'll happily take G at United.
I don't think that comment will go down too well with Chelsea fans. But yeah, I think moving forward, then we'll talk about ownership. So it was something that we sort of touched on before, and obviously James mentioned it as well about sort of here about the microscope being put on sort of owners. But I think, we had a conversation, didn't we, Rob? And you sort of said, there was talks, and then I read yesterday that there was talks in interested parties, and they're hoping it'll be done quick. I mean, in terms of going forward, then this is, it's obviously the ideal scenario. Is there anything you want to talk about on ownership, Rob, or anything that you might have heard that you're allowed to share, or anything?
Yeah, I mean, from an ownership point of view, again, let's say that when a top European club comes up for sale, in a situation like this, it's a once in a lifetime sort of situation. So naturally, there's going to be an awful lot of interested parties. I think, I've heard 200 sort of, quoted. To the best of my knowledge, there have been 10 proposals put forward that have been considered to be credible from various parties who have provided evidence that they have the necessary funding. The Rain Group have, according to what I've been told, been given the instruction that it's not necessarily about who has the deepest pockets, it's about who sells the best vision for the future of the club. Because again, in his original statement, Roman Abramovich pointed out he wanted to sell it to the people with the greatest sort of, who he felt would take the best care of the football club. I think, despite the government managing the financial side and the transactional side of the sale, I don't believe they have any involvement in the actual process of picking a preferred tender. Again, I can't see why they would. It would probably massively flaunt competition law that you have a government directly, impacting and scrutinising a sale. In terms of the sort of names that are the front runners, I suppose, there is a consortium with Todd Borley, Jonathan Goldstein and Hanyol Weiss, who are a collection of various businessmen. Again, Bowley has a stake in the LA Dodgers. Goldstein is a sort of property magnate, and Weiss is a Swiss philanthropist. Bowley, again, from what I can understand, has done very well in charge of the LA Dodgers and seems to be sort of fronting this project. Again, looks to be, quite a credible option. There is obviously interest from Saudi Arabia that's been mentioned by the Saudi media group. Again, they've come out with sort of a lot of promises in their statement, promising to invest in the women's game, promising to, renew key contracts, promising to build a new stadium. Again, I feel that considering that there's been a reference to politically motivated bids, I find it very, very hard to imagine that there is not a company of this size in Saudi Arabia does not have some sort of governmental link. And I think that will, ultimately put the kibosh on that offer, rightly or wrongly. Again, I may be, doing them a complete disservice, but I find it very, very hard to imagine that a man who's multiple times been pictured with the Crown Prince has no connection to the government. It would also, I imagine, cause conflict of interest arguments because, as all know, even though TIFF have not been directly proven to be Newcastle United, we all know directly they are Newcastle United. And, we shouldn't hide that fact. Other names include Nick Candy, who is a lifelong Chelsea fan. He is, again, a Tory party donor. He's a property magnate who appears to be borrowing money from Citadel Capital in the USA. Again, he's promising things like a fan representative and fans on the board, which, again, in principle sounds good, although I wait to see it in practice. I'm always very sceptical about any sort of, owner coming in. And I suspect there will be other names behind the scenes that are credible offers. From what I understand on a personal level, from who I know, it sounds like Bowley, Weiss, Goldstein feel they've progressed well with Rain Group. They feel they would get over the governmental hurdles. They can secure the finances quickly, and they are setting out quite a good vision. But again, I think the tendering process ends on Friday. I'm told a preferred bidder is expected to be named on Saturday or Sunday, and the sale is expected to progress quite quickly after they're saying even potentially by the end of March, because the quicker it's done, the quicker all the uncertainty is ended, and people can get back to focusing on the actual on the football side of things. From a personal sort of point of view, I have little requirements for an owner. I have I'm very cynical when it comes to ownership, and ultimately owners saying they're going to have fans on the board and do this and do that. I'm well aware that what they say in reality, what they say is often different to in reality. All I want is someone that will come in and will safeguard and fund the football club properly, won't try and asset strip it, won't use it as some sort of political sort of tool or some sort of tool to further agendas. And most importantly, they keep on the good work of CFCW and the Chelsea Foundation and the charity aspects of the club. Because I think that is, the aspects that, and the Charity Foundation is one I do feel very sorry for, because there's no reason on earth they should have been sanctioned in this. They should have been kept separate from sanctions all the way through, because they don't make any money. It's a complete not-for-profit organisation, and that work they do is now being affected because of the scope of the government licence.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing. Is I think that would be the sort of questions I'd have, is that when somebody does come in, like you talked about the asset stripping, but also I think in terms of the women's side, are they going to fund that women's side as well as was previous? Is the money going to be made available? Is that going to be something that's a potential worry? I don't know if you want to sort of jump in on that quickly, Gareth. It's difficult because obviously we're sitting here as sort of non-Chelsea fans, but I think if I was, on that side, I'd be saying, well, hang on a minute, are we going to get this funding? Are we going to get everything we were promised? Can the new owners, as Rob said, say one thing and do it as well, or are they just going to talk and then it not happen? But what do you think on that?
I think if you're buying Chelsea Football Club, you're buying all of Chelsea Football Club. You wouldn't expect somebody to come in and close an academy. So I don't see why somebody would go in and close a women's team. So or kind of severely cut back funding. So yeah, I think that's something that kind of needs to be clear and kind of needs to be apparent. I think there's a whole discussion around whether it should be part of the contractual agreements to playing in the Premier League that you have a women's team. I think you should be going in that direction. There are kind of discussions around the fact you need to have an academies and certain things like that. So I don't see why a women's team wouldn't be a part of that. So I think it's tricky, and I think football ownership from, whether it's from the European champions or whether it's down to the bottom of League Two and International League, there is just this culture now of poor ownership. And, if you take out Roman's links to Putin and kind of to, like he's an oligarch, he actually ran Chelsea well. Yes, he invested heavily in the transfer market and did go out and buy players and things like that. But the club was well run, and you want someone to come in and do the same, just hopefully without the kind of skeletons in the closet that Roman had. I just think the issue is when you have a club that's valued in the billions of pounds, that actually nobody gets that rich without having skeletons in the closet. So regardless of who it is, there's going to be negativity there somewhere. So it's just about how they run the club and things like that. I think that's the important thing. And I think the FA themselves, working with the Premier League and the EFL, need to do more in terms of ownership to make sure that the owners are suitable. I think the Newcastle one strikes me as being bizarre. It was blocked in the first instance because they didn't want kind of state ownership, essentially, of clubs. And then they kind of come back in and say that, actually, the majority isn't being run by the Saudi government. It's another shareholder that is working in conjunction with them. And so they need to kind of close this loophole. But it's tricky. I don't know what the answer is, but that it is resolved soon that there is a new owner in charge of Chelsea is important, but it's equally important that it's the right person.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously John mentions here about, not holding his breath for the government making decisions. But again, they're going to have to for the sake of the club, really, because at the minute they're holding sort of all of the cards in terms of it progressing forwards. I want to move on and I want to talk about away ends because it's a big talking point. It's a little bit of a bugbear between the majority of WSL club fan bases, not all, but some. I may as well start with Reading. We played Reading Saturday, and there was, obviously they played the men's ground, and there was a little bit of a discussion, we'll say, with stewards there because basically they moved the Man United fans and put them all the way at the very back of the ground. And the reason was because they were mixed in with Reading fans. And then our argument was, well, if you put out on your website, you should be booking in these two blocks and then your home fans do the same. That isn't our problem. So I think there's different feelings on this. And again, anybody that's watching, come and give us your thoughts. But I think for me personally, there's no harm in away ends. I think away ends is something that we need to see. We see it at, various clubs and it works. I know, Rob, you have it at Chelsea. I know we've given behind the goal at Man United. Other clubs do it as well. But for me, I can't understand why people are against it. If people want to mix and they do it as unreserved seating, then for me, that can work. I understand. I think there's actually John, whilst he's in the comments, I think I saw his tweet and he was saying at Man City now, it's reserved seating. And when you decide to go somewhere last minute, you're forced to sit somewhere and you can't sit with any friends that are attending. So I think things like that do need to be looked at. But I think personally for me, away ends, it's not a bad thing. It needs to be done. As the game grows, it's going to be done. There's not really trouble as such at games. It's very, very rare. But I think, potentially with more men's fans coming over and more people that do look to go to games just to cause trouble, it's potentially something that's going to be looked at. Gareth, I'll start with you on thoughts on away ends and then Rob can come in. But I think for me, I'd like to see it introduced where possible.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think there's something about an away day that the atmosphere of an away end is something completely different. And obviously in the men's game, that's primarily a numbers thing. You kind of got your more vocal support crowded together. And it makes the day. I don't think that we should go, full on hard divide. This is where the away fans go. This is just for home fans. I think, and I also don't necessarily think that it should be reserved seating either. But the option should be there for away fans to sit with other away fans and not be scattered throughout the stadium. If you look at Wembley on Cup Finals day, there is an element of a neutral zone, which is kind of generally the Club Wembley area, and neutrals will buy tickets to finals and they will go and they will watch it, but the bulk of it is going to be the home fans and the away fans. I think that it's something that needs to happen. I think it's something that's probably needs to happen for a while. I think the difficulty comes in the larger stadiums, St Andrews, the Madejski, places like that, where actually, in terms of the number of fans that are likely to attend, it can almost become expensive to have an away end. I kind of understand that is a potential. In that, you need the stewarding, you need various different other things open in order to have an away end, and you may actually not sell a huge amount of tickets. But I think if it's viable, if it's cost effective, it should absolutely be done.
Yeah. Rob, your thoughts on away ends?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's not much more I can add on that point. I can't see, firstly, if you're mixing in with the home fans. We had that, I think, was it the Leicester game in the FA Cup a few weeks ago? It was fine. Fans aren't going to games, and especially away fans aren't really going to games to cause trouble. It seems like unnecessary policing of the game again, and the lack of understanding of why people are actually going to matches. If there was some big hooliganism issue, I could understand why we needed segregated away ends, but there's not. Do I think it's important to have an area designated for logistics' sake? Yes. But I don't think, it needs to be some sort of cast iron bona fide sort of, specific, you're only allowed in this area, you're sort of penned in. I'd thought we were past that in stewarding. Obviously, as the game grows, that might be needed to be considered, but I just don't see why. I don't see why some people object to it. That's the one thing I really do get confused by, because a lot of people say to me, away ends is going to ruin the family sort of friendly atmosphere, and I don't really understand how the two of them correlate with each other. Again, that just seems to be one of these things where people are using this family friendly atmosphere, and I don't necessarily think that's the best thing in the long term for the growth of the women's game as well. But it seems to be that just seems to now be the roadblock for every single issue, and everything is going to spoil the atmosphere, and it's not.
Yeah, I think for me, this is what I can't understand. Like, you mentioned atmosphere there, and I think that was another thing that was sort of levelled at fans on Saturday. Oh, why are you making so much noise? Why are you standing up? Why are you doing this? And I think that's the one bugbear that I think the majority of fans, don't like. Fans want to be able to go to games and support their club how they want to, how they feel it's, necessary. Whether people agree with it rightly or wrongly is up to them. But I just think for me, when you've got people sort of policing it and saying, well, you can't do this, you can't do that. Now, obviously, if it's getting abusive and swearing, fair enough, people should be saying something. But I think for me, you can't be, the game's changing. You can't be going to people saying, well, I don't like this and I don't like that. We understand people, have friends and a community, and, people go much other teams and they all sort of meet up and it's a social, great. But, I think, Gareth, you mentioned about neutral ends, there's no reason at grounds now, especially some of these bigger grounds, why they can't say, right, well, if you want to, be neutral, or you want to sit with your mates, go in that end. If you want to sit with your fans, go in that end. And if you want to be whatever, go elsewhere. But I just think it's bizarre because, you're almost, one, for me, feel like you're stopping the growth in the atmosphere, which is what players want. I think, and two as well, you go in there mainly for the game. It's great for social, but you go in at the end of the day to support your club. And I just think that when fans are mixed in and they don't want to be, I'm pretty sure, I can speak for myself and say I don't want to be sat anywhere near Man City fans on Derby Day. I'm sure, Rob, you don't want to be sat near, Arsenal fans, things like that. So I think there's got to be some sort of resolution, whether clubs engage with fans and say, right, away days, what do you want? I think another thing I find strange, and I'll let you sort of talk on this as well, Rob, is the ticket sales. I know it's been how it has for a while, but surely going through the home club to get your away ticket and then having to sign up for all these accounts, I can see signing up for all these accounts and marketing emails, and then even when you're opt out, you're still getting harassed. I mean, what? I can tell what you think about that, but talk to me on that, Rob.
Yeah, it's one of those things that absolutely bad. If it was, for example, there was, sort of they were saying, oh, we can't do that because there's not the demand for it, I would understand it. But there clearly is the demand for it. And again, one of my particular situations I've been trying to get off a mailing list now for sort of around, this predates COVID. This goes back even before. This predates COVID back in sort of 2018, I think it was. I went on an away day. They're still emailing me. And I've tried to move off their mailing list thousands of times now. I've got to the point where actually, I sent a letter, an actual written letter a few weeks ago to their marketing director and said, are you aware I've tried to leave this? This isn't GDPR compliant. Because I work in this industry and I know what is and isn't, and you need to make it, easy to do. Now, it's absolutely ridiculous to me that you need to keep going through, especially when you then ring up away end. One of the other ones I had was I rang up an away end this year an away game to try and book tickets for it. And they said to me, we don't know anything about that. You need to ring your club. So I spoke to Chelsea, and Chelsea said, oh, we don't know anything about that. You need to go to them. And so I was sat, so who is actually in charge of selling the tickets here? And because the process is already in place for Premier League games to do it, I can't, and for European games, I can't understand why that exact same mechanism can't just be transferred. It is not as if we need to, go through some new convoluted process to buy them. Just literally do the exact same thing. And that is what really, really frustrates me, because it seems to be, again, a lot of the problems in the women's game, or things I perceive to be problems, have easy solutions. It's just we seem determined, rather than pursuing a solution, putting up roadblocks as to why it can't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob says as well in the comments, it dilutes atmosphere. Gareth, your thoughts on it then? Obviously, mainly more just on sort of, that bit that we've talked about the ticketing issue, because I know that was an issue in our first year in the WSL. Man City said, oh, well, United have been given an allocation, go to United. We went to United. It was like, no, we don't know nothing about it. Go to City. And it's back and forth, and it just puts people off because you can't be bothered half the time. But yeah, go on, give us your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's having to kind of create accounts at numerous different places is frustrating. And yeah, we need to kind of move away from that. And away tickets need to be purchased through the club. The allocation should be given to the clubs, and then the clubs sell them. And it's not something that's uncommon for any of these clubs. Durham, possibly, yes. London City Lionesses, yes. But every other club is likely to have a ticketing system where they're given an allocation and they sell them. Even those non-league clubs like Lewis and Coventry have probably had all ticket games previously. So it's not a difficult thing to do. So, I don't necessarily think it dilutes the atmosphere. I think that there is potential for away ends actually to dilute the atmosphere when you move outside of the bubble that you're in. It's why you always hear away fans go, oh, we outsung the home fans for 90 minutes. No, you were just stood in that noise and not in the other noise. So I think potentially it may be tricky, like for things like TV, but actually this shouldn't be about that. It should be about kind of match-going fans, and it's absolutely something that is necessary for that. Yeah,
I think spot on again, especially in sort of men's grounds as well, where you spread out is enough as it is, and I worry. I mean, we've got Old Trafford in a week on Sunday, and I just think ticket sales are supposedly doing okay, but yet we've not filled the lower tiers, and I just worry for again that just the atmosphere more than anything. I'm not a fan personally of men's grounds unless they're going to be at least half full, and I think to be able to fill half of a 75,000 seat stadium is going to be a big ask without sufficient. It's all well and good tweeting about it, but there's men's fans chatting to me the other day and they said, "Oh, I didn't mention it." It was like, you're going like we didn't know, and I'm like, well, clearly then tweeting about it is great, but you're missing a big target audience. I'm assuming men's games, because there's clearly, obviously, nothing there. And I think if you're not promoting it correctly, it's going to kill it. Don't get me wrong, it's great, but then you want to be encouraging fans. Then those ones that maybe come to it as a one-off, you want to be encouraging them to permanently come to games. And I think if it's too difficult and not well promoted and, difficult to access, it's going to put people off, and especially the current situation at Leigh. I know we're slightly going off topic here, but where, they've got season ticket holders one side, and then if you buy a ticket on the day, you're completely away from everybody else. And I know people have had difficulty, people that take children or want to take, nieces and nephews in addition to their season ticket, they're having to, move or say, oh, well, you can't sit together. And it's just the whole situation. I mean, it's like that for away days, but the whole situation, I think, for me, needs looking at. TJ says here it's not the best look when a match is empty. And yeah, especially when people slag it off anyway. Final topic then I want to move on to is obviously the FA Cup prize money. So Molly Hudson, I saw her article yesterday, I think it was, she mentioned, now obviously this was mentioned probably about a month ago that it was due to happen, and there's no figures, it was just something that was put out there. She said yesterday that the FA Cup money is increased tenfold to 3 million a year. And it was sort of mentioned that, Chelsea women, when they beat Arsenal, got 25,000, and Leicester City got 1.8 million. And there's this big sort of divide. And again, there's lots said on sort of the lower league teams that were making a loss. And I think that was mentioned as well this weekend on Friday. Coventry are going to be making a loss going to Arsenal. Travel, hotel, whole lot of expense. And now we're sort of seeing a little bit of a level up. So I think I'll quickly give my thoughts and then I'll pass over. But I think for me, if we see that money filtered down, I think that's the first start for me. I think it's great that it's increased and it's good that teams are getting sort of more equality. But I think it's got to filter down. We can't be seeing tiers sort of 5, 6, 7 teams, losing out and then it killing the club because they've gone an FA Cup run, especially when we're trying to sort of, grow the game, boost the pyramid, things like that. People talk about expanding leagues. I think it's very important that money is sort of ploughed in at the bottom and then works its way up, especially to clubs that need it. Rob, do you want to start us off on that and sort of thoughts surrounding it?
Yeah, I mean, I read the statement, and I think the statement said it is disproportionately favoured towards the early rounds, the new injection of cash, which is obviously a good thing. Again, situations like Coventry, I think, being in the quarter-final and making a loss on it is farcical. Saying it how it is, it's absolutely ridiculous they've got that far. Effectively, you're penalising them for doing well in the competition. I think, I'm a big believer in the integrity of the FA Cup. Again, it's been discussed, and the very sporty integrity has been on everyone's lips today for various reasons. But I'm a big believer in it, and I think it's a great competition. But I do equally think it needs to be funded properly and appropriately. So I welcome this news, but I also think it's important to say this should be the start of the, improvement and push towards funds being similar. And, the early rounds, especially getting the sort of money to ensure it's worthwhile for clubs rather than this being, the end and everyone sitting and congratulating themselves and patting themselves on the back of look how well we've done.
Yeah. Gareth, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think it's important that this has happened. I think it's what people wanted. It's not as far as what people wanted, but I don't think anybody really realistically expected us to go from there being this enormous disparity to being level straight away. So, that hasn't happened, and I didn't think anyone really expected it to. But to get a tenfold increase is good. My concern was going to be that when I heard that it was likely to be announced, then the concern was that is this going to be something that is going to trickle down, like we said, or is it going to be a major injection for the winner and then not a huge amount for like lower down? The fact that it seems to actually be that it disproportionately is affecting the earlier rounds is a good thing. So yeah, I think it's good news all round, and I think it's really important that this has happened. And like we said, there's so many times where clubs have made losses where all rounds, and actually the incentive for winning is there should be a financial benefit to it as well. We know in the men's game that it can really kickstart a season, and teams can really push on from a good cup run and can if the League Two side gets to the third round, then that's an enormous cash injection that they can kind of build their next season around. So we want to kind of see similar things in the women's game, and this is the first step to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with that as well, like you said, sort of in terms of building the competition, I think that's the main thing for me, because you look at the sort of the men's competition, and the magic of that, especially as a lower league side, and sort of not only the money, but I think the broadcasting as well. I think one thing that is a criticism, certainly for me anyway, this year, is sort of accessibility. I think we played Man City and there was that, and I think Arsenal and Liverpool was potentially on the red button. And then, there was nothing.
Chelsea Leicester was filmed in order for the FA player to put it on 2 hours after the game finished on the FA player, which is just absolutely ridiculous. I refuse to believe they couldn't have live streamed it over Instagram or something where it doesn't cost any money. It seems to be something that's apparently about sponsorship rights and something to do with Vitality, but I find it hard to imagine Vitality would have said no to more exposure.
Yeah, John saying, if I haven't seen Lewis' proposals, then really should. A good reallocation for them. Yeah, I mean, personally, I've not read that, so I don't know if anybody in the comments or if either of you have read it. But again, it just baffles me because, like you said, obviously we've campaigned and people have sort of been very vocal on getting this. And it's great, but then there needs to be more. Like for me now, the next step is the visibility. Like you said there, you've recorded a game to be on FA Player 2 hours later. Hand on heart, how many people want to go back and then watch it if they know the result for the whole game? I just think something needs to be done. We've got the FA Player, but we don't use it, and we don't use it really for Conti Cup either. I think it's something where that gap in the market needs leveling up. And again, obviously we're talking prize money, but if you're talking prize money, for me, you've got to boost the competition as a whole. Gareth, is there anything you want to sort of add in terms of like accessibility or, viewing of games, things like that?
Yeah, I just think that, it does seem crazy that there's only a couple of games that are on each time, whereas I think if you get some exciting ties in the early rounds, then it would be great to have that accessible. It not saying necessarily needs to be on TV, but just some kind of way of watching this game, way of following the game easier. There's potential for some really exciting games. There's Clapton deserved the opportunity to be seen. It can attract new fans to them. And Coventry deserve to be seen playing Arsenal, and I think the quarterfinals definitely should at least be somewhere. I think the FA, you could argue the FA player for that probably is a bit too hidden, but definitely the early rounds we should be looking to get those on the FA player somehow, or whether it's that, whether it's YouTube, but there should be some way that is then kind of promoted by the FA to get these games seen.
Yeah, TJ is saying here, modern day and age, it should be streamed somewhere. I suppose in terms of that, in terms of money, again, it's sort of like you say, it could potentially attract new sponsors and new revenue. Not only a great cup run with the money, but like you said, Gareth, promoting these sort of smaller sides, your Claptons, your Coventries. But I think something for me as well, and I think you mentioned this at the time, Rob, in terms of scheduling. Again, something that needs sorted out, because I think you tweeted, or we might have even had a conversation, and you said, I think there was a cup final for the men on the Sunday, and at the time before it got changed, you were due to clash, against sort of with the women's team playing Leicester, and then it did get moved. But I think going forward as well, what's your thoughts on scheduling? Because again, it's not great, is it? If you look at it and you tie it all into accessibility and availability, scheduling is massive. I mean, if you're a Coventry fan, how are you going to get to London on a Friday night after work? It's just not possible, is it?
Yeah. I mean, scheduling's a difficult one because, once you talk about scheduling, you then start talking about broadcasting. Companies are going to want broadcasting rights for certain time slots and certain times a day, and that's going to involve, scheduling that ultimately, doesn't take fans into account. Let's be completely honest about this. They don't really care about the match-going fans when they schedule games. That's why there's, a 6:45 slot on a Sunday. for matches, which is just utterly obscene, and why, Manchester City were asked to come to Kings Meadow for a 12 o'clock kickoff, which again is ridiculous, and the sort of journeys that, I commend every fan that makes that journey. I think the thing I will say about scheduling is that it does increasingly feel like the women's game gets treated as an afterthought. And there, for example, things like that Chelsea-Leicester game, the cup final was in place since, the beginning of the season, the date for that. It was quite clear once Chelsea got through and were in that cup final, that was known since, a month before. It was known before that draw was made. It could very easily have, been addressed at the time. I think that increasingly there needs to be the pressure to actually I'm not going to set standards for every single game, but to schedule it on a basis that if people want to watch the men and also want to watch the women, they should have the facility and the encouragement to be able to do that. And obviously you might have some clashes, like the other day, Chelsea playing on the Sunday an hour after the women played, but at least then I could watch the second half of the men's game. And, I could watch part of it. And if that is the case of what starts to bring people into the women's game, maybe they watch the men's game and then later on they can watch half the women's game and they see, the men maybe don't do so well, but they stick the women on and they win. And that encourages them to put it on next time because they want to, they think, hey, they look good, we'll do that. Then that can only grow the game a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Fully agree. We've come to the end of the show, so I'd like to thank you both for joining me. Obviously, we are back on Thursday. John has got a match reaction show for the West Ham game. Cheers. Thank you.